Hey, Year 12, Lesson 3 of our study of the UK Executive. To start off with, we're going to do a couple of knowledge retrievals. Okay, and to help you with this, in terms of timings, you can utilize this particular song by James. Sit Down. It's 4 minutes long and it'll be superb for it. Okay, the first exercise is 4 minutes. What you need is a piece of paper. You put down the side 1 to 7 and see if you can fill in the diagram. Start now and pause your video. Oh, maybe you took 4 minutes over that. Check your answers here. It's really important that you're aware of the different aspects of the core executive. And by learning these terms, you become much more familiar with them and you'll be much more effective in terms of discussion about where power really lies and how decisions are made. Okay, here's our second knowledge retrieval exercise. What I want you to do is see what you remember about these three key components. All right, they're important because what they allow you to do is to explain and also analyze where power really lies once again. So we're thinking about bilaterals, cabinet committees, and the cabinet office. Give yourself 4 minutes again. Pause the video now. Go. Okay. Here we are, the different aspects about the different components of the core executive. First of all, bilateral meetings. Crucially, this is linked to the style of the Prime Minister. So when we're looking at Prime Ministerial power later on, we'll be discussing the relevance of styles such as Blair and Thatcher and how they used bilateral meetings to dominate their cabinet. Also important to consider cabinet committees where decisions are made outside the cabinet, how increasingly they're being used as a means of pre-cooking decisions that will eventually be taken to be rubber stamped in the cabinet themselves. And finally, the cabinet office, as we've seen how significant that is recently, with Michael Gove coordinating government policy from the cabinet office with the help of the permanent secretary who oversees, the cabinet secretary who oversees the whole of the civil service. So it's important again that we're aware of these, and certainly in preparation for future assessments about the different components of the core executive. Good. Okay then. So now we're moving on to another example of cabinet in action. This is linked to not only prime ministerial power but also the collective cabinet responsibility and how decisions are made. It's an example from 1986, and you say to me, what happened in 1986? Well, the Westland affair and also Alex Ferguson becoming manager of Manchester United. These are two things that should hopefully help you to remember. If we're looking down at the political context in 1986, have a look at this diagram and you can see that Thatcher came into power in 1979 with a majority of around about 50 for the first term. In 1983, following the success of her Falklands War, she enjoyed a majority of around about 150. And the period we're looking at is before the next election, which is 1987. And you can see her majority slide was just sliding a little bit, was still very significant, with around about 140 before the next election. That's important when you're thinking about her personal power in regards to the party. Slightly closer political context is to consider what her cabinet was like at this time. In terms of opinion polls, Mrs. Thatcher party, the Conservative Party at this time, was third in the country. This was a concern for the Conservative parties and the MPs. They were worried about the next election and the impact that might have. To try and freshen things up, Mrs. Thatcher decided she was going to have a reshuffle in 1985 and certainly look at the major offices of state and see if she could change things around. The person who was the fall guy was Leon Britton, who was moved from Home Office down to Trade and Industry, seen as a demotion at the time. She couldn't move Howe, who was the Foreign Secretary, or Lawson, who's Chancellor, without actually having a huge impact upon her party. So she chose to go with Britton. Now this is significant when you consider the next event that occurred. And this was called the Westland affair. Michael Heseltine was her Defence Secretary at the time. And there was a problem in the sense that the Westland Helicopters, a British company, was under financial pressure. The plan was to change over ownership of Westland Helicopters. Heseltine preferred the European option, which would mean a conglomerate with both French and German manufacturers. Mrs. Thatcher was much more in favour of a US operation called Sikorsky, and she had Leon Britton, who is now her Trade and Industry Secretary, behind that decision. Heseltine was keen to bring it to Cabinet, and if you remember the IMF crisis and the way in which Callaghan managed that situation, he considered the importance of bringing the collective decision-making together to ensure he didn't get any resignations. Mrs. Thatcher was in a difficult position too. She couldn't sack Heseltine for wanting to force through his decision because she had, of course, already had a reshuffle only a year before. So she had to try and manage that situation the way she wanted to, but she definitely wanted to have the American option. What I want you to consider is, how was it the case that Mrs. Thatcher managed to go through this situation and lose 2 ministers, right, in comparison to the IMF crisis where Callaghan lost none? To do that, you need to do some research on the key people, the key methods used by the PM, and the key issues and the consequences that are around it. This article is from the BBC, so if you were to Google that, you'll be able to find about the Westland affair. But added to that, we have 2 other PDFs that I've sent to you so you can do your research. After you've done your reading and your noting, what I want you to do is go to OneNote and put the notes in about who were the key people, what were the key issues and the consequences, and what were the key methods used by the Prime Minister. By doing your research, you'll get a better understanding about how collective responsibility was relevant in this context, and also how it shows how a different Prime Ministerial style can be used in a particular situation. This will allow us to have our seminar and discuss the major factors that are relevant to the Cabinet in the UK. The majority size in this situation, the Prime Ministerial style, the role of the media, the composition of the Cabinet, and especially the experience of the ministers themselves. Okay, good luck.